make the closure remarks. Now, I think it's time to start, and I think it is a very nice program that we have, although I'm sure that most of the people in this room are already acquainted with the books that we are going to present. Now, let me just say that I give much importance to these 3 volumes for a number of reasons. The first reason, I would say, is the very title, Balancing Freedom, Authority, and Accountability in Education. Now, although we rarely pronounce the names this morning, this afternoon, we have been speaking mainly about freedom, autonomy, and accountability in education throughout our proceedings, because they are 3 basic tenets when we look at the connection, the permanent connection between education and law. One of the fascinating items about ELA is exactly its capacity to focus on education and on law at the same time, which is not always the case. The second reason is that because it combines information and theory, 1 volume mainly about theory, and also there are some chapters in the other volumes about theory, about putting together different experiences and perspectives, and then you have a very rich information country by country, and mind you, although we are more accustomed to talk about Europe, the book takes into consideration also extra-European countries, which is particularly important. And the third reason why I think it is important is because it, in a way, marks a sort of, I would say, a turning point in the lifetime of ELA, which is short and long at the same time. And it came out, and I think it was presented officially to the public and to the scholarly community at the second, am I right, at the second World Conference about Law and Education in Brussels in 2012. And I like very much the idea of producing a book which looks at the world and at the same time transforming the very structure, the permanent focus of ELA on law and education in the world. So that's why I say it is a sort of landmark in the turning point in the lifestyle of, in the lifetime of ELA. And I know that ELA is preparing other academic meetings having in mind the world, which of course is very ambitious indeed. But it is true at the same time that we are growing accustomed to focusing on the world whenever we talk about fundamental rights. And of course, this raises by itself very important issues. I think I said enough. I just let me add that it was my hope that this conference would attract more interest on the side of students. That was not the case. But of course, that raises even more the expectations from the course. And I insisted very much that our library has this book because I would like to test the student and see to what extent they want to go into the field of law and education through their own work. So I think that anyway, it has been an excellent investment for the library, let's put it this way. And also because of this investment in the library, Olga was also able to see the book, and so all our colleagues. And so let's make the best use of the 20 minutes or so that we can give to the topic. And I would ask Cinta to start, and then Olga, and then Jan, as one of the 2 co-editors, will make the concluding remarks. I forgot to mention and that there is a long list of colleagues and friends and supporters of ELA who sent an email regretting not being able to be here. I couldn't mention all of them, but certainly I would mention Charles Glenn, who is one of the co-authors and who tried to be here until the very last moment, but then he could not be in 2 parts of the world at the same time, and I'm sorry that he had to choose the other part of the world rather than Trento. Thank you again. Cinzia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start giving you the kind regards of Fulvio Cortese, who, as Professor Tognati said, has got the flu, so he can't be here, and he's very sorry about this. I'm very happy and very glad to have the pleasure to present the 4 books, which provide for a broad overview of education and law and legal regulation of law of education in many different legal systems. This is not the first time that ELA was able to collect information and legal regulation and different perspectives from all over the world and in the field of education. This is a very precious research. Today, Professor Tognati said that ELA is a resource for all of us, and I completely agree with him. And this is very precious material for comparative lawyer. I am a constitutional comparative lawyer, so for me, these books are very precious material. I cannot, of course, consider all the topics that have been considered by these books. This morning we spoke about homeschooling. There's a wonderful chapter about homeschooling, but I do not have the time to consider the single topic. So I tried to think about the possible presentation of the books, and I decided to consider the 2 basic concepts that were analyzed in these books and the 3 main perspectives that were adopted. The 2 main concepts are education and multiculturalism. Education, of course. In these books, there is a basic conception of education, which is something dealing with individuals, their values, their culture, and first of all, the sense of cultural identity, and I would say to their identity tout court. This is something which is very similar to the concept of education, for example, in EU law, where we have seen an evolution, because at first education in EU law was something aimed at improving human capital, aiming at increasing productivity. So if you have well-trained persons, you will have efficient workers, and EU productivity will grow. Gradually, the right to education appeared to be something dealing with the fact that you do not only have employers, you do not only have workers. For example, in vocational training, it was not only aimed at having good workers. More and more, it was also aimed at individuals and at their improvement as citizens. So education today in EU law has to deal with the idea of having good EU citizens. If we look to the right to education in constitution, of course I think mainly to the Italian constitutional, it is a multidimensional right from its origins. In Italian, when we speak about the right to education, we translate it as istruzione or educazione, and I think that especially the second one, education, educazione, has to deal with a dimension which is relating to person, to the idea of training good citizens. The other basic concept beside education is multiculturalism, of course. The multicultural perspective, especially in the legal dimension, in something which is perceived as being rather normal for people coming from some countries and people accustomed to some legal system. It is something perceived as being the normal perspective in societies which are characterized by social diversity. In countries like my country, Italy, this is something we have to deal with, I think, only in the last 20, maybe 25 years. And this, I think, was very, very healthy for us. Multiculturalism in Italy was healthy because it was something useful to understand ourselves. We used to perceive Italy as a country based on a cultural homogeneity. And this was true in different fields, education, was one of them. But in many cases, we were more fragmented than we thought. Unfortunately, the legal debate about multiculturalism in Italy is overwhelmed by one basic question: the teaching of Catholic religions in school. And you know that we were one of the states provoking the ECA charge jurisprudence on religious symbols. This is well known. But when I asked to students, do you remember if on the wall of your classroom there was a crucifix? They generally said, yes, we remember there was a crucifix. And when I asked my schoolmates, so person of another generation, I really can't remember if there was a crucifix on the wall. And when I asked my friends, do you remember if our schoolroom there was a crucifix? Generally, they can't remember. And I think this is the reason is that we didn't perceive it like a symbol of a group. It was just Italy. And this is a clear sign of that we didn't perceive diversity. In other countries, multiculturalism was useful to meet and accommodate other cultures, to know them, to understand how to coexist or better to live together. But first of all, the multicultural dialogue is important to know yourself, like the Greek aphorism, know thyself. If you have an interlocutor, you have to understand yourself, who you are. And we were more fragmented than we perceive our cultural homogeneity. So these were the two basic issues that were considered, education and multiculturalism. They were considered in three perspectives. I've already said that there are 4 volumes, and I really appreciated the 3 points of views that were adopted in these 3 volumes. The first one was educational freedom, and it is clearly said that today it deals, the authors say, with what would be unjust and unworthy of a free society. This is the basic question to understand educational freedom. The second one deals with school autonomy. And here we see different subjects. There are the staff, the parents, the school boards, and the pupils. And there has been a perfect definition because they say that all these subjects have to reach a common outcome. And the outcome is a shared understanding of the best way to educate. I like this definition very much. The third perspective is something I want to consider with particular attention because it is accountability. This is, I think, a very interesting perspective. Because through the concept of accountability, we can use the educational field as a kind of lab, as a kind of paradigm to understand and interpret some social issues as constitutionalists we have to deal with every day, constantly. Traditionally, the definition of accountability, I think in Italian, but also in this international legal English I use, is something dealing with the responsibility of a subject or a group in relation to a result to be achieved. This is part of the definition of accountability, which is used also in these 4 books. But this is only part of it, because it seems to me, and I'm glad that one of the editors is here, so maybe you can correct me, that the books are referring to a concept of social accountability, which is a crucial issue in our societies, and particularly when we speak about welfare states and welfare rights. We are used to think in terms of claims of liberties and rights. We go to the court, we claim a right, and we want to obtain something. But when we speak about welfare rights, education, health, housing, we discover more and more that this right costs, and that these rights and liberty are linked to responsibility, that there is an individual dimension, what I want, what I ask to the courts, but there also a collective dimension, the society bearing the cost of my claim. And I'm not referring just to cost in terms of money. That's part of it, because as we all know, there are limited resources. But I think, and this is the most interesting thing to me in these books, that we are speaking also of the social cost that society has to bear when we claim the recognition of a certain diversity, a certain groups. This seemed to me to be the concept of accountability that has been considered by the authors, a social accountability. And Professor Glenn explicitly speaks of the societal impact with regard to the increasing role of government in taking over functions that were traditionally met by other subjects, families, religious associations, and other institutions. And maybe, but you will tell me, it is the concept that was considered by Professor de Groff when he tells us that maybe this concept of social accountability is the result of a juxtaposition of accountability and autonomy which started from the 90s. The school said if we had to respond to certain criteria, you give us autonomy. And the state answered, if you require autonomy, you have to meet some standards. I want to quote, I'm stealing the words of Professor de Groff in this book, which say...
You're borrowing, I'm sure.
Stealing. I'm borrowing your words. This is not contradictory. The increasing delegation of powers to the institutional level, accompanied by an increasing powers and numbers of norms of central authorities. States, and this seems to me to be crucial, should guide the education sector through a framework of general rules, policy objectives, funding mechanisms, and incentives for quality education, equal opportunity, norms, and standards. In return, for being free from over-regulation and micromanagement, schools should accept full institutional accountability to society at large for their results. And here, I think we have another idea which came out also in the debate this morning, that if we think that when we consider welfare rights, we have to consider social accountability, meaning the social consequence of the recognition of how much diversity, we have to take into account a procedural way which is based on negotiation. It is said in the books that sometimes juridification and judicialization might result in an excessive recourse to legal procedure to resolve issues which were previously stated by negotiation and informal agreement. And I think that in the dialogue with diversity, there is much room for negotiation, and it is clearly proved even at a legal level. Because sometimes this request is coming from the court. The court has said, you should leave room for negotiation to the parents, the school boards. Of course, if we go to the court, we were unable to reach an agreement. But you have, sometimes this is a procedural aspect, which is legally imposed. And sometimes it is the law which requires that there should be negotiation. Professor Tognati before recalled the case of Bavaria, where the Bayerische Gesetz über das Erziehungsunterrichtswesen, sorry very much for the pronunciation, say that if you, for the crucifix case, if there should be the crucifix, then if someone claims it should be removed, school authorities try to find an agreement. Some days ago, I found on our newspaper here in Trentino, there was a school board say that the fact that in a very small village in a valley, the fact that the children were supposed to pray before eating was not was in contrast with the principle of laïcité, which is present, not the laïcité française, but we have Italian laïcité, but it is present at constitutional level. All the parents say, for us, it is not a problem. This should be taken, I think, in consideration, but it also should be taken in consideration that if there is an agreement, it should have a legal relevance, but even one person might be a minority worth of consideration. In France, for example, we watched which was the main case regarding religious symbols. We all know that history. But the first thing you have to do when someone is claiming the right to wear a religious ostensible at school is a process of negotiation, because the school board calls the pupils and the parents and then try to negotiate. This is not really a good negotiation, because as far as I have understood, the negotiation is you don't have to wear the veil, I want to wear the veil, that's it, we go to court. Nevertheless, even if right now it doesn't work very well, I think this is a procedural aspect we should take into particular consideration, because it might be important to the extent we consider the protection and the definition of the Kulturstaat as something which is not only the promotion of culture, but also a kind of a wider constitutional cultural project dealing with the constitutional framework and with its relation to pluralism. From this point of view, school is a paradigm or a kind of lab of for multicultural dialogue. And I wonder if it is by chance that in our language, in Italian, especially in Italian language, we are starting, it has already been mentioned this morning, to refer to multiculturalism in the field of education more and more as interculturalism. To me, this might tell us that integration in the field of education is like a result of different things put together. I mean, negotiation, accommodation, exceptions. And I want to stress that in Italian, we cannot translate accommodation. I'm not able to translate the word accommodation. I think we don't have this word in our language. As a multicultural and intercultural lab or paradigm, education shows all the problems of this difficult dialogue, of multicultural dialogue. The first one is identification of the subject. Sometimes, I think to the French case again, I had the impression that we did not hear the voice of pupils. And sometimes they are not children, they are younger boys and girls. When we had the affair of Creil, when there were the mayor, the fathers, and a big debate about the veil, I didn't hear the voice of the girls. What does it mean to be obliged to wear or not to wear the veil? Is it a choice? Is something you feel belongs to your cultural identity or not? This, I think, was something missed, and this would be very important. And again, if accountability, as considered in this book, is something dealing with responsibility of subject or group in relation to a result, we always have to bear in mind which is the result we want to reach. Again, in the French case, it was a very complicated issue, but after they banned the religious symbols, the result was that many girls stay at school and they prefer, it was in the report of the French government, to learn, let's say, with the internet school, that you can do it by home. So if the result was laïcité, it was completely achieved, because you don't have religious symbol at school at all. But if the result to achieved was equality, because you assume that the veil means that there is no equality between men and women, I think that we didn't have a good accountability and a good social accountability. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to see, I must say, these books. I haven't read them very deeply, but I understood the meaning, and some chapters I read very carefully. But in general, I can make two observations, I would say. One is on the contents, and is the most important one, and one is on the method, because I see, reading this book, how interdisciplinary work is important. Because sometimes parents go to courts, or teachers, or even politicians, government people. So really, lawyers and have to be familiar even with educational topics. So I think that working together can be very helpful, both to learn, because of course the point of view of law is different, sometimes touch topics which seem to be seem to be for us usual. And then when you see a different point of view, you see that it's absolutely not usual. Maybe it is a discussion point. So methodologically, the interdisciplinary work is very interesting. About the contents, I would touch 3 points. So autonomy of school, and so autonomy of school. Until now, we were discussing about religion, about ideology, about ethnic belonging, but sometimes autonomy is important for something else. For example, everybody of you know the Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner, and he said, is it clear what is the Waldorf schools? Rudolf Steiner, this anthroposophy, he said he doesn't want that this school is a state-run school because they need autonomy to follow the spontaneous development of the children. So really many parents like to have a different kind of school, not for religious or ethnic reasons, but really because the state school nowadays, after PISA, is too much teach to test. So we devote in Italy more time to evaluation than to teaching, because we have invalsi, we have traditional examinations. So sometimes the autonomy of school would be interesting not only for religions or ideological or ethnic reason, but really for quality reason, to have a better school. And that's why sometimes parents try to have the familiar schools. There were some experiments in Trentino too, but they had to close, I read on the newspapers just the last weeks. So autonomy for different reasons. And it is named in the book because Charles Glenn talks about climate, culture, ethos, character of a school. It's not only the big topics that we discussed in the first part of this afternoon, but it is even other reasons which just justify autonomy. For example, in Italy, many parents choose Catholic schools because we have most Catholic schools as not state-run school, not because they like to be more Catholic than the other ones, but because maybe there is more commitment, or there is a higher quality sometimes, or because teachers are more controlled. So there are many reasons to have autonomy of schools. So second point, freedom of schools, and it is what we discussed, and freedom inside the schools. Maybe this point could be more studied, because I read the German part, which was, so the description of the German school system, which was written by Charles Glenn himself, who is a comparative researcher, but I would have appreciated that it is written by a native German researcher. Because, for instance, I learned in Germany the Beutelsbacher consensus. The German people probably know. In politische Bildung, many decades ago in Beutelsbach at the Landeszentrale für politische Bildung, researchers and teachers met and decided that you can't teach civics, for example, without respecting the controversial principle. So you have to, and I went to Cologne last week and it was written, Beutelsbach concerns Kontroversitätsprinzip. If you teach history or, I don't know, controversial topics, you have to give to the pupils the different interpretations. In a state or not state school, that is, in my opinion, autonomy, freedom inside the school, because you have not the right to say only one version of why the First World War or
the French Revolution.
Yes, where there are problems, of course, but because when there is only a good solution by the historians, no problem, but even for religion or for all discuss topics like resistance, Widerstand, la resistenza, or even the industrialization or capitalism of Euro, you have to give the different, important, of course, interpretations. And so this is, in my opinion, freedom inside school. And what is about the freedom of the teachers? You touched this problem. I remember in 1974, you know, it was 1974, it was lo stato giuridico degli insegnanti. I was already teaching and we discussed a lot, very enthusiastic. The first point was the respect of the pupil and the family beliefs. So the freedom of the teacher has to respect the freedom of the pupils and the family beliefs. So we can't come to school and say, you have to be all communist or all Catholic or whatever. And that's why, of course, the teacher is not allowed to bring symbols for party political. But anyway, it should not be neutral, because neutrality is very near to relativism and young people need models. In my opinion, the German solution of a controversity principle is a good one because it allows yourself as teacher to say your opinion, but not presenting it as the solution, but as one of the possible solutions. So freedom of the teacher has to be accepted because the teacher gives not only information, but gives their own beliefs, their own enthusiasms, or their own, it is part of her personality, but should be controlled in the sense of not invading the freedom of the pupils and of the families. And I be very short, not like this morning. I would conclude with a very difficult question mark. So the importance of the school teaching, the school education for the development, not only of the boy or girls, but for the development of the society. And here I touch some topics. You probably know Ivan Illich, the descolarization. Nobody knows Ivan Illich? Yes, 78, of course, 68. He said the school is wrong anyway, because first of all, it's paid by poor people and it helps rich people. Secondly, school only teach not to think independently, but to think what the teachers want from me. So it is freedom of school. It's very important what we teach, how we teach a school. Of course, I'm not for descolarization, but Illich gives very good inputs. And then I think my first book was about, yes, education in general. So Schleiermacher, for example, said, as less state as possible in the school. We are not allowed to have a state pedagogy. So that's why freedom is part of the education of pupils. And the third example, the Summerhill schools. Probably somebody heard about Summerhill is a hill in England, I think, where pupils are very free to learn. And of course, it is a special school for very few people. And So they do everything different in comparison to state and to not state schools because they have this freedom. But at the end, the pupils are able to enter the university, to pass public examinations. So the freedom of school is even a kind of how to not to teach only, but to educate, to go together with the natural development of children. So really how we teach can be important even about which society we will have. For example, some days ago, I told to someone here, to a colleague, I had a speech during the the lunch with a teacher, and they told me, oh yes, a pupil was not attentive at school, so I told him, we will declare you handicapped in order to give him a punishment. Of course, it was not the good way to work by the teachers, but I told that to a colleague of mine who has a boy at school, and she said, oh yes, then children learn to do the same when they will be adult. And that is true. Children pass at school at least 200 days in a year, mostly more. And in Italy, we have, according to OECD, we have the longest school time of almost all the world. So they learn even habits at school. So the autonomy of school is, in my opinion, very important, even to pass different models of living if teachers, school authorities are aware of the importance of how to educate pupils. What does it mean? It is not only learning to test, but it is learning to think about, to have documented reasoning, and so on. So I really appreciated very much this work because it is a different point of view, and it is not only a legal question, but it is really something that involves the real kind of working at school or without school, if you prefer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga. It was very insightful. And I think it's always interesting how different readers get something different from reading the same materials, and that means that a book has many meanings and a manifold development. So Jan, you have the floor for some concluding remarks. You have been quoted, so you must give some answers.
Well, I should be short, and you should read the books. I will be short on the condition that you will ask your librarian to buy the books for the library of your faculty or your center or whatever. Please let me first thank Roberto Zanetti to give us the chance to shortly focus on this book and to have also taken the leadership on promoting this project.
Noted they were protecting the index here?
Definitely. Oh, that's nice. Okay, yeah. And I have some formats for those who want to subscribe the book. They can do it later on. Thank you so much. Well, we highly appreciate it on behalf of Charles and myself. We highly appreciate it. But I also highly appreciate both of your comments and your analysis. You upgraded significantly the relevancy of our book. Our 4 books. The sentiment of modesty and of proudness overwhelms me. Proud because both of us, we finished the job. You cannot imagine what kind of efforts we made during these several years. Yes. For the last edition, we needed the 3 years of all our holidays and free weekends, and it is not exaggerated at all. Refining, correcting, improving, writing, and researching on these 4 books. Proud, because it is quite unique. It is the third edition is a comprehensive study of 89 countries in the second, the third, and the fourth volume. Proud because it's also a commitment to research for two modest friends, Charles and myself. We did not been paid for these books. No 1 cent, no 1 penny, no €1 we have got from this project. We put a lot of money in it, actually. It is for free, but it is a token of modest contribution for research and for training and for education in education policy and education law. And also modest, because working with Charles is giving you reason to be modest. He's the best comparatist on earth. Without any hesitation, I will repeat that again and again. And it was a fascinating project to work for more than so many decades with him on many projects. And he's, after all, also one of the ELA founding fathers, 21, 22 years ago. Modesty and proudness. Well, let me focus very, very shortly, because also due to the time, and we have the fundamental right to have a beer, good German or beer or whatever. Let me focus very shortly on the strength, on the weaknesses, and on the opportunities. Strength of these 4 books. First, the success of the books. So the first edition was published in 2001 by another editing house, Lemma. Actually, they were composed of 2 volumes. And you can not imagine, but no 1 volume is still the same. So it is the 3rd edition, the 4th edition, 2000, 2002. We were that proud to being quoted by many ministers during their speeches, and not just as a moment of courtoisie vis-à-vis both of us, or loyalty or whatever, but because they read the book and they used the book. Even visiting an office in the World Bank, books were there. 2002, 2000, first edition. Second edition, 3 volumes. And a completely renewed first volume with essays on educational freedom, on role of the state, on legal status, on you name it. And now the 3rd edition, 2012, 2013, presented 4 volumes, presented to the Second World Conference, immediately sold out. What was positive, and also, well, the demonstration of the needs and relevancy of that kind of comparative work. So, strength. First, because it is dealing with the core of a nation and of the most important service of the state, namely education. Several times Brown versus Board of Education was quoted, and their education was quoted as the most prominent service of the state. Education, reflecting the history of each nation in all perspectives. Education, being the standing agenda for politics at a daily basis. Education, being the ground for the future of the state, the nation, and each person. The strength of this initiative was also the power of comparative education law, comparative constitutional law, comparative disciplines dealing with education. What was not that easy at all. And the methodology well, comparative education, comparative law as such, the bank of information to never transfer as such good practices from one country to another, but it is réservoir de vérité, de solution. It's detecting your strengths and your weaknesses. We need comparative law much more than ever. But also on the methodology. So being a lawyer, and I don't know what, well, Charles is an sociologist and a political scientist and an anthropologist and philosopher and is a real homo universalis, dealing with all branches of human sciences. And I'm just a modest lawyer. Utrius que juris, that's correct, but still a lawyer. But how fascinating it is to combine these disciplines, and it is quite rare, I guess, I know, that you have to reach consensus on texts. And our methodology was quite fascinating. We needed electronic technologies to work on third, eighth, 10th version of each text. Each text was revised so many times. And we discussed, we debated during or after ERA conferences at night on different spots of the last 12, 13 years. Also in Antwerp, of course, because on the cover you will prominently rediscover Rubens. And we are that proud to being able to, well, also to use a cultural product of diplomacy, because he was a diplomat. Rubens, he was also a political scientist to some extent. He was not a lawyer, but probably that helped diplomacy not to be too legal scientist. So it was an exciting experience on using technology and using different sciences on refining the core of education for the future. Weakness. There are several weaknesses. And of course, it's not the place to detect too many weaknesses. But we should broaden the scope. You should read the third edition of the first volume, what again is completely different of the first and the second. The third edition, first volume, is focusing on, for instance, what is the European pattern of the right to education? What is the African pattern? What is the Asian specificity on the right to education? What about Latin America? Written by friends, colleagues, and we try to redefine. So it is a source. We should use these opportunities for further research. So it's, of course, it's a weakness. And we have to update some chapters and to reconnect other, let's say, country reports and making more use of comparative analysis. Opportunities. Well, let me be very frank. That is an enormous invitation, an invitation for all of us to repeat that ownership is yours. Because of course we are the co-editors, we are the authors of many chapters, we are the co-editors of the whole book, but it is a standing invitation for this 83, to be honest, more than 100 authors or co-authors of different chapters. It should be an initiative, a project still in process for the future. These are your books, not just to read them and to reread them and to consult them and to quote them. Yes, that would be nice to be quoted. But also to cooperate. And we try to gap the vide through our international journal for educational policy, what is also your journal. And in the next volume, Marco's analysis of how to compare and how to try to rank all these systems. Because in the first edition, you should read that first edition. At the very end of the first book, we tried to rank for the first edition 40 countries, 43 countries, on several parameters. That was an exciting exercise. But for the lack of time, we did not repeat that exercise on ranking education systems, on autonomy, on freedom, on responsibility, on all these indicators. We took 6 months just to work out that ranking system. So we do invite young, brilliant researchers. That should be a topic for, at the minimum, 4 or 5 new PhD projects. This is a standing invitation for your students, your most brilliant researchers and master's students who are fascinated with a passion for education, law, education rights, and all this constitution and other aspects dealing with education, to come and join the club, to make profit of it, and to ground, to inspire their research for the future. There are many opportunities. We did this a treasure for the whole family, for the ELA family. And the ELA family is expanding. It's not just dealing with Europe. It is a WELA, as Marco mentioned several times. It is a World Education Law and Policy Association project for the future, for most of us, for all of us. And if we could, for the 4th edition, who knows? If we could broaden the scope and broaden the family and the project, we will be honored. These books are yours. Thanks so much, Roberto.
Thank you, Jan. I think this puts an end to our seminar today, so I have to thank you all. And if you are not good at taking notes, don't forget that we are on internet. And if you go to the website of the law faculty in Trento, you will see that there is an archive of seminars and conferences, and you can link on the proper link and see everything all over again. Perhaps you can do it once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once in the evening if you really want to fully appreciate what has been said. Perhaps, Graciela, you may like also to distribute the link to all those at least who wish to come and were not able to attend the meeting. Let me just also add one thing, that the very first issues of the journal were very thin. Now I look at this, it's quite thick. And they were in a different color. They were sort of light blue and sort of violet or purple. Do you remember? But they were very thin indeed. Whereas now each issue is very fat, I should say. And I say fat not only in size but also in content. So I think it was really very useful, and I'm very grateful to all of you who came to Trento. As I said this morning, my intention was to plant a seed, and ELA seeds usually are of good quality. So I trust that also the seed of ELA that was planted here in Trento will be of good quality and will help a very nice plant to grow in the near future. So thank you very much. Tomorrow morning, of course, everybody is more than welcome to take part in the proceedings. I think it will be very useful to try to understand how to develop not so much ELA by itself, but the activities that are at the heart of the activities of ELA. I say not ELA because already somebody is taking care of ELA. I remember once in a meeting which we had in Bruges, one of the topics is how and where is education law taught in Europe. Of course, now it was not only a matter of concern for ELA, but for WELA as well. But I think that the first step may be to try to assess the level, the quality, the status of teaching education law in Europe. This would be very, very interesting, and I wonder if tomorrow we can talk about it, but of course we'll be free to find out any interesting topic. And then we'll give some time to Olga Bombardelli, who will present her Comenius project, Eclipse, European Citizenship Learning in a Program for Secondary Education. Here a number of countries are represented, and the experience deals with advanced teacher training and education training of young people. So in a way, it is a sort of test, and of course, it will be very interesting to find out what the outcome of this project is. The idea is to start at 9:30. I think we deserve, being a Sunday, to take it a little bit easier. And of course, in Italy, the academic quarter of an hour is a must. So 9:30 means 9:45. So not only we are generous, but we are very generous. But anyway, I think we'll arrange now for somebody to come and pick you up at the hotel in order to be here and start at 9:45. So let's be clear about it. So nobody will come here too early and then wait for the rest of us, because the plan is to start at 9:45. Okay? So enjoy the evening, and thank you very much for the participation, which has been very, very interesting and inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. That's all.